Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of You Get to Be You This Time. I'm Veronika Archer, your host for this series, where we are discussing how to create a life you love without compromising who you are when recovering from traumatic relationships. In this episode, I'm so excited to be talking with Dr. Michael Kinsey, who will be sharing about parenting with a narcissist after you leave. Make sure you stay to the very end of our conversation where Michael will share a free gift that he has for you. So Dr. Michael Kinsey is a New York City-based clinical psychologist, author, and founder of Mindsplain. Dr. Kinsey is an expert in parent-child attachment and specializes in treating personality disorders, trauma, and relationship issues. His philosophy in life and work is to be direct, playful, and irreverent. When he's not playfully working, which is rare, he's sleeping or birding. Welcome, Michael. I'm so excited to be talking with you on this topic today. It's one of my, I was going to say favorite, is not the right word, but it's definitely an important topic, parenting, if you've had a narcissistic ex. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and participate in this cool event that you're putting on.
Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun talking with all these amazing people. So let's start off with Mindsplain, your website and project. Tell our listeners about that and what motivated you to create it.
Well, Mindsplain was an idea I had, I think just seeing a need in the cyberspace for looking at problems through the lens of the mind rather than sort of taking a very practical kind of behavioral approach to things. I felt like in the self-help space or the support space or the recovery space that there was a lot of kind of generic, not wrong advice, but generic impersonal advice on things. And I came at it with the approach of maybe there's a way to help people kind of take clinical wisdom, psychodynamic principles, and apply it to their life in a more personal way. And so I'm really trying to create a space that allows people to really do things playfully, but playfully as a code for kind of personally integrate healthy, healing, fun, and yet psychologically rich ways of healing into their life.
Yeah, Michael, that is such a great combination. I love what you said at the very end there about combining all your clinical knowledge and expertise and combining that with that personal and playfulness. Is Mindsplain specifically focused on narcissistic personality disorders and people who have experienced those, or is it include other topics as well?
It's, really, it's meant really as a general mental health, flourishing approach to achieve some sort of flourishing life approach. Narcissistic abuse recovery has become a major focus because there's such a need. And I think there's such a vibrant and active community of people who are interested in that type of content. But I have all sorts of content up there, from sleep tips to just general articles on trauma to general parenting advice, and so it's really meant to just be a place where people can satiate a certain amount of curiosity about the mind, and I do have a fair amount of content, though, if narcissistic abuse and narcissistic loved ones are a part of your life experience.
Yeah, it's a great resource for all the things you talked about just now, mental health in general, but then for our listeners, if you are dealing with recovery from traumatic relationships, which we know, of course, you probably are, just all kinds of articles and tools on there. So Michael Kinsey's website is Mindsplain, Mindsplain. So do check that out. So Michael, your background or your expertise is in personality disorders. And and also parent-child attachment, which I find interesting. We've spoken to people who focused on one or the other. Can you tell us just a little bit more about your background in those two particular areas?
Sure. Well, I did my training at the New School here in New York City, where I'm located, and I worked with some pretty world-renowned attachment researchers, Miriam and Howard Steele at the New School, and they're from a tradition based in London, the Anna Freud Center, where they got a chance to work with the parent-child attachment kind of forefather. John Bowlby, and then Mary Ainsworth, and kind of the founders of that movement. And one of their close colleagues was also a man named Peter Fonagy, who's still around and doing a lot of important work on borderline personality disorder and mentalization-based treatment. None of that is particularly relevant, except for that. It was a really core aspect of my training that I got to see kind of the child at the center of the adult personality disorder.
The child
Really,
at the center of the adult personality disorder. That's so interesting. Can you talk about that a little bit?
sure. I mean, I think, one of the amazing things about attachment research is that there are these really cool, I guess, experimental paradigms where you actually see kind of these interpersonal dynamics in action, and you get to observe how these concrete behavioral patterns end up kind of being encoded into the psyche. So the classic example is the strange situation paradigm, that's based on kind of systematically separating the child from their parent,
Hmm.
and putting the child in contact with a stranger who's a lab confederate, and just seeing what the reactions are. And just from that little simulation, you start to see how the insecurities, the anxieties, the vulnerabilities of the child really turn into kind of adult pain, adult struggles in relationships, and making sense of the world.
Yeah. And so, of course, today what we want to talk about is we're going to combine those two, the personality disorders and parent and children that are raised in those homes, and how it affects the child, and then how we, as the what I call the normal parent, can support them. So I know it's such an important topic to people who are moving away from traumatic relationships and trying to support themselves as well as their children. So let's just start, Michael, with a brief description, if you don't mind, of narcissistic personality disorder. We have talked about it a bit on this series, but in case anyone's listening to this episode and hasn't listened to the other ones where we dive into narcissism in more detail, can you just give like a quick overview of what a narcissistic personality disorder is?
Sure, I'll do my best. I mean, I think it's a topic of endless fascination, and there's so many different angles to it. But I think the best way of thinking about it is a development of a kind of false self, and the creation of a false self, and that's emerged in the context of a childhood, family, home environment where vulnerable emotions weren't tolerated, and anything sort of authentic from the child wasn't tolerated, and really creating an identity around a very kind of rigid, fake, and usually pompous, but it could be it could be a kind of wounded or vulnerable, deflated kind of persona or false self, or one that's just very empty and kind of compliant, as is kind of manifest through the egoism type of narcissistic vulnerability. But but it's one that's fundamentally kind of divided into good and bad, and these very polarized views of the world, and the bad is located in the exterior.
The narcissist has really polarized views. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah. Okay.
the narcissist sees things in black and white.
Mm-hmm.
Views are polarized, and the object of the narcissist is really to make everything that's bad exist outside of them, and everything that's good be located inside of them, but really in located within this false self that they've created.
Michael, that description that you just gave, I have never heard before, and it just totally landed with me as someone who's experienced this, which is that everything that's bad is outside of the narcissist. So everything is somebody else's fault. They've never done any wrong. They don't take responsibility. That's my interpretation of what you just said, that everything bad is outside.
That's exactly right, yeah.
Yeah, and then everything good is inside, right? So they're responsible for all the good things that happen. And certainly, we're going to talk now about how that can impact a child that is raised in that kind of a home. And I can already think of some examples, just having witnessed it myself, but I'll let you share. So how does that polarization that the narcissist sees the world in, how does that impact a child that is raised in a home with at least one narcissist?
Well, essentially, the shortest way of putting it is that the child can't really exist in full. I mean, it's the child has to learn to take up very little psychological space. The most seamless adaptations are ones where the child doesn't really express anything kind of authentic or vulnerable about themselves, and learns to put forward the same kind of pleasing false self that the narcissist has learned to put out. That way that there can be a sort of idealized and synchronized type of relationship between the narcissist and the child.
So the child is putting forward a pleasing, a false self themselves. So they don't necessarily know, they don't have a sense of autonomy that's important for children. And what I'm guessing here, but please correct me, as they get older and it's important for them to then go out into the world and do their thing, they don't really have their own identity to draw from in order to move forward. Is that a correct summary?
Yeah, and I think there's other manifestations as well. I mean, it can be a sort of emulation of the false self, as I described. But one of the more common ways that I see it too clinically is that you'll see people who have just not they're shapeshifters. They're people who have not really learned to inhabit any particular stance or any particular way of being, because it's too threatening to the narcissist and therefore too threatening to the self. And so they're just kind of these amorphous people that don't seem to be able to really pursue goals or persevere through adversity, or even choose takeout. If you're trying to figure out what's for dinner, and it can be, I mean, I'm laughing, but it's a really kind of tragic thing that people don't really know what they want, and can't make simple decisions about their daily life and activities.
It is a tragic thing, and someone who's maybe trying to interact with that person might get frustrated, like, why are you so indecisive? There's probably lots of reasons why someone may have ended up being really indecisive, but it sounds like if they were raised by a narcissistic personality type, that could be one of the reasons, because they don't know, because they weren't allowed to have their own opinions and their own identity.
Yeah, and the narcissist, obviously, a lot of people, I think, will really relate to the fact that the narcissist desires take up a lot of space, and they are typically very decisive and know exactly what they want or what's acceptable, and the family adjusts around that.
Yeah. Yeah, that absolutely hits home for myself. Um, so, as somebody who is leaving a relationship, um, let's pretend that one person is not disordered. I know often it's not this black and white and this straightforward. We're going to live in the narcissist world for a minute and make everything really black and white. But let's assume one parent is not disordered, the other parent is. And for our audience, when I say disordered, I'm referring to it like a narcissistic personality disorder. It could be other disorders too. So one parent is quote unquote normal, not disordered. Um, how can that parent, they've left the narcissist, so that's great. Perhaps they have shared custody, or their children, and even if they don't, their children have all these ramifications, right, of having been raised by a narcissist. How can that parent support their children now in, I mean, I'm almost thinking of it, Michael, as being like reparenting, like, okay, now you have to kind of fill in all the things that these children didn't receive while they were being raised in a home with a narcissist.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I think, one way that I'll respond to that, and I think, just as a way of maybe alleviating some listeners' feeling of overwhelm.
Yeah, I think what I said was very overwhelming. So thank you for that, Michael.
I mean, it feels like a huge task when put that way. But something I'll just put out there is that children are, in some ways, they're very vulnerable, but they're also very resilient.
Mm-hmm.
And children will really kind of show you or tell you what they need in really kind of profound ways. And I think it's helpful for parents to know that children sort of instinctively do or are drawn to things that make them feel kind of restored. And so listening to your child and really following their kind of interest and their lead can be tremendously important.
I love that. It sounds so simple in a way, but it's, I can see how that would be really impactful for the kid.
And I think, it's very natural too to be concerned that something that a child is doing is a sign of trauma, which it may very well be, or a sign of harm done by the narcissistic parent or by the separation. But it also may be even if it is a kind of post-traumatic symptom, it also may be a very healing one. And so one of the things I think that's really important, and it's a big part of my message, is just creating a really safe space for the child to play and express themselves. Mm-hmm. And that could be very different depending on what the age of the child is. But even for older children, I think that principle still holds true.
Yeah. Michael, can you give some examples from perhaps, your clinical work of ways that a child might show you what they need? Because I have 3 kids myself for our listeners. So definitely, and as most of the listeners know by now, was married to a narcissistic person. So very much relate to all this. And I'm thinking of my own family as you're talking about these things. I think sometimes kids, they might be showing you something that they need, and we don't understand what they're trying to show us, or we interpret it in the wrong way, or we kind of gloss over it. Do you have any examples that would sort of clarify, something a kid is doing and that they're trying to actually show you something or tell you something?
I guess the types of ways I'm thinking of is, for a really young child, it may be a kind of unusual way of playing with toys, or maybe dramatic or violent ways of playing with toys. For older children, it might be a way they start to dress or express themselves, or the kinds of friends they get involved with. And not to say that as a parent, if your child is starting to hang out with a questionable crowd, that you shouldn't be concerned. But there is a way, I think, of being concerned while really kind of understanding and looking for the validity and maybe even the wisdom in why the child might be gravitating gravitating towards a particular group of friends.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's so easy as parents for us to just jump to the negative or the fear, if your kids maybe dressing in a way that you think is wrong or inappropriate, or if they have friends that you don't particularly like, our minds immediately go to, oh my God, they're going to ruin their life. I have to get them back on track. And then you start, you're just butting heads with your kid because they want to do one thing and you're freaking out over it. And probably neither of you are getting what you want, basically.
Yeah. Those once you're entrenched in a conflict like that, one of these kind of cold wars or even heated battles with your child, it's really difficult to get out of them, because so much of the relationship with a child who's anywhere near adolescence is going to be kind of rooted in trust and whether or not you're interested in promoting their autonomy and trusting their judgment, or working against them and feel like they're not capable of doing things on their own.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there gets to be all of these kind of collateral battles and all these kind of meta level conflicts that end up piled on top of the original misunderstanding.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point. Michael, are there things that a child who's been through this, who's been in a family that has these narcissistic dynamics, are there things that child might need that a child who didn't go through that it's not as important to them? Are there things that kind of come up that a parent should be aware of?
Well, I think one thing that you and I have spoken about privately before is kind of helping the child find either a mentor or a role model of the same sex or same gender of the narcissistic parent. That I think can be really useful. One thing that I think from our conversations in private, I've wanted to add to that discussion is that, again, this is another way that the child can be the lead, can take the lead. Like you don't, as a parent, have to necessarily go courting different role models or look out for them.
Right. And that's something I do hear quite a bit, Michael, is people who are like, oh, my child doesn't have a dad, I want to go find them a dad, right? Or a mom, for that matter. And that's not really what you're advising. You're let the kid take the lead on what they need.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whether it's a coach in sports or a teacher in some kind of extracurricular activity or a teacher in school, the child will instinctively be drawn to the people who kind of capture their imagination. And I think there's so many, I see this all the time with parents where they're saying like, you should spend some time with so-and-so. There's, I think would be good for you. And the kid's going like, really? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, the kid doesn't relate to that person at all.
No interest whatsoever.
Yeah, it's not nothing's gonna come out of that.
And it doesn't mean that the parent's idea is bad or wrong, but it's just not what they want. And I'm sure you can relate to experiencing the willfulness of kids of a certain age, and always better to go with the grain of that as much as possible.
Yeah. Michael, something that you and I talked about that I think would be so important too to share with our listeners is the focus that so many of us have who've had these kinds of relationships on the negative aspects of the parent. And you had talked about, this was so enlightening to me, you had talked about the importance of focusing on the positive traits of the other parent and the narcissistic parent. Can you talk about that a little bit and why that's so important for the kids?
Yeah, well, whether we like it or not, the narcissist is a part of who our children are.
Yeah.
It's a part of their identity that they're going to have to construct in the world. The narcissistic parent, for better or for worse, is going to be a role model. There's going to be a strong identification that happens if the narcissistic parent is involved in their life, and sometimes even a small amount of involvement is enough to create a big identification. And again, just this following with this idea of going with the grain, I think the question parents have to ask themselves is, okay, if my child is going to identify with a narcissist, which aspects of this do I really want to encourage and promote?
Right.
And that, I think, is a really key question. And it's super hard emotionally because I think there's, as you've pointed out to me in the past, there's this real desire to help the child prepare for disappointments. And those moments are actually kind of easy to respond to when you've been at the receiving end of a lot of narcissistic abuse, or at least bad behavior from a narcissist. It's easy to be there for the child because you know what that pain feels like. You know what it's like to be lied to. You know what it's like to be manipulated or gaslit. And so, kids are very receptive to the normal parent when there's pain involved. But when there's not pain involved, and we all want our kids to not feel pain as much as possible, it's bad for the normal parent to be at odds with the influence of the narcissistic parent.
Yeah.
I think a really useful exercise is to kind of think back to the time when you were in love with a narcissistic parent.
Right. I mean, you were attracted to them for some reason, and whether those reasons were a facade or not, there was some reason that you married that person or decided to be in a long-term relationship with that person. So there's some good traits there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's hard to kind of sift through the rubble and find those parts again. But, a lot of narcissists are incredibly successful in their careers, maybe for bad reasons, but that's a good place to start. Some of them were incredibly successful marshaling support, getting resources or custody in the divorce, and maybe there's something adaptive you can find in that. There are points of pain for sure, and it's really hard work, but the ultimate aim is for the child to be able to have a positive representation of themselves, and accepting that part of that representation is going to involve incorporating the personality of the narcissist to some extent.
Right. So Michael, if your child is going to emulate their parents, I think typically more the same sex parent. Is that right, Michael? Is that a standard thing or no?
I think it's the strongest influence. I think it's true of the opposite sex parent as well. I think it's the same principle, but I think it's much more likely that if we're talking about an ex-husband, that the son is going to be most impacted by any kind of criticism of the ex-husband. Yeah.
Right. And so your children are going to emulate their parents, both you and your ex. And so from what I'm understanding, Michael, is if you are able to find the positive traits in your ex, then and talk about those to your kids, and then your kids will be focusing on that and hopefully emulating the positive traits. And that's sort of your intention there. Is that right?
Yeah. In pure behavioral terms, if I'm a dog lover, it's very similar to training a dog in the sense where you reward the good behavior, you wait for the good behavior to emerge, and that's what you focus on. That's what you reward. That's what you love.
Yeah. Okay, so very briefly, because I know we're like running out of time, and I know I can talk about this topic with you just forever, but I want to briefly touch on parallel parenting. You hear quite a bit about co-parenting when you're divorcing or separating from the parent of your children. You want to co-parent, and it's all over the divorce sites everywhere about how to set up a co-parenting plan and all this stuff. And I remember when I was going through this, I was like, I can't co-parent. Like a narcissist does not, there's no discussion, there's no compromise, there's no collaboration, right? Which is what a co-parenting plan is. And then I learned about parallel parenting, and I was like, oh, that's what I need to do. Such a light bulb moment. So can you just briefly touch on what it is and how to do it?
Well, my perception of it is exactly what you said, that it's just it's what you do when you accept that there's going to be more harm created to both your own mental health and the mental health of your child or children by trying to collaborate with a narcissistic ex than to simply work as independently as possible to create an environment for your child that they can thrive and flourish in. And since children really learn mostly by observation, I think attending to your own mental health and well-being is a really important model to create. And I think parallel parenting, the way that you really set it up as just kind of coordinating as minimally as possible with your ex and really focusing on creating the type of environment that you value for your child.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that can be really challenging. We so often just want or need sometimes the other parent to weigh in, and getting into that mind frame of I'm going to parent the best I can when the kids are with me, and coordinate only as needed with the ex, and not have expectations. I think that's what it is for me, at least, is to not have expectations of co-parenting with that ex, because it's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you, Michael, have some tools, some free tools for our audience if they are co-parenting, or rather parallel parenting, with a narcissistic ex. Can you share that with us?
Sure. I'm going to have on Mindsplain on my site a downloadable kind of worksheet and tool to help parents kind of sort through some of their own values and some of the things that they want to be bringing to their parallel parenting experience, and also helping the normal parent sort of figure out which aspects of the narcissist they can get on board with their child emulating. I think, there's so many different situations. Maybe this is a little bit late for a disclaimer, but there's so many different situations.
Oh, Michael, this is why I always tell people to stay to the very end of our conversations, because things always come up at the very end. Go ahead.
I think part of, my message, I know, is so counterintuitive, and that I think it's inevitable that there will be misunderstanding or at least some, I think my message could be interpreted as, being empathic or making excuses for bad behavior, which I don't mean to be the case at all. So I think that the tool I'm putting out there is a way to help people really kind of validate their own experiences, help parents kind of validate their own pain and the difficulties emotionally of having to parallel parent or co-parent with a narcissist, while also being able to navigate a really tense situation in a way that works out well for their child.
Yeah, and thank you for creating that and sharing that. That is such an important, it is so important, to be able to support your child through the situation. You've just been through a huge trauma, and your children have also been through a huge trauma, and you're trying to support them while you're also recovering yourself. It's a really difficult thing to navigate, and having these tools available just really makes that process, just supports us in that process. So I'm so grateful that you've created this tool. So it's a downloadable workbook to help you identify your goals around parallel parenting with a narcissist, and also to identify maybe the positive traits that you want your kids to emulate, which I just think is brilliant and so important. So thank you for creating that, Michael. For our listeners, if you want to take advantage of this tool, you can find it on the event page. Just look for Dr. Michael Kinsey. Same place where you accessed his interview, you will see a link, and it will take you directly to that free gift. So do take advantage of it. And before we sign off, again, this is why I always tell people to stay because we do always talk about stuff. Michael, I know that you work a lot with children, and or you work with adults, but you have a lot of expertise in childhood dynamics and attachment. And you actually have a children's book that I just think is so beautiful. And I would love for you to just share that briefly with our listeners.
Sure. Yeah. So I think one of the biggest challenges of parenting is making the transition from providing every last bit of care and nurturance that a child needs in infancy into becoming independent thinking, independent acting, autonomous adults. And I created a children's book that's just as much for parents as it is for children. I think it's really appropriate for all ages, but the book is called Dreams of Zugenruhe. And Zugenruhe is this migratory instinct in birds, taken from German originally. Zug means, maybe I better not talk about the roots, but
well, I thought it was fascinating, but yeah, okay.
I have a feeling I'm going to mix up the meaning of the roots, which I don't want to do. But
okay.
But the book is essentially a conversation between a mother and a young tern, a young Arctic tern. And Arctic terns travel the furthest of any creature on Earth. And
for anyone who doesn't know, those are birds.
And
a tern is a type of bird.
Yes, thank you. And it's just it's a dialogue between them that I think really models the soothing and encouraging stance that that allows both for the child or the emerging adult to feel scared, to feel apprehensive, but also feel emboldened. And I hope that it's helpful to anybody who's struggling, find their identity, to literally or figuratively launch. And so I put that out there, and I hope that it enhances people's experience of navigating separations and autonomy and all of that.
Yeah, that's great. So navigating separation, autonomy, anyone sort of having a hard time, failure to launch, is that what you just said? I think that's a movie. So this is Dreams of Zugenruhe, I'm going to spell it wrong, Zugunruhe, Dreams of Zugenruhe by Dr. Michael Kinsey. Check that out anywhere books are sold, right, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, it's available through Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all of the usual online purveyors.
Okay, and probably also on your website, Mindsplain, Mindsplain.
Yep.
Fabulous. Michael, it was so wonderful. Yeah, it was wonderful to talk with you, and thank you for sharing your expertise on parenting and parenting with a disordered parent. It is such an important topic. And I'm sure our audience learned a lot today. To our listeners, don't forget to check out Michael's free gift that is on our event page. So thank you very much, Michael. It was such a pleasure talking with you.
You as well. I really appreciate the opportunity.
And to our listeners, just a reminder, you have access to this conversation with Dr. Michael Kinsey for a full 7 days. Go back, write down the name of that book, as well as all the other tools that he shared today. And of course, as always, don't forget to check your email, your spam, your various mailboxes in your email for the next conversation in this series. I look forward to connecting with you.